Welcome, fellow content nerds. This is the show in which I break down 3 videos in order to explain how they were edited. In fact, these 3 videos, let me just say, they were crazy. So, with that being said, I'm Ryan, editor, agency owner, and content creator, which means I deal with content every single day. And in order for me to stay inspired, I created this show. That's probably enough you need to know. I'll make a deal with you if you at all catch yourself enjoying yourself or learning something new. Consider smashing the subscribe button, will ya? It helps more than you know. And with that being said, let's dive into video 1 of today. Also, drink new tonic. Here we go.
White people. They say we only like salt and pepper. Not me, though. In fact, I have too many spices, which is why I'm henceforth dedicating myself to concoct the perfect spice. Episode 1, dehydration. Now, to get an ingredient to look like this, I'm gonna have to find a way to just yoink the moisture right out of it. I'm trying to dehydrate a tomato, which is not a woman, so telling it I drive a Cybertruck is not gonna do the trick. So I cut it into thin pieces, put it on a tray, toss it into the oven on a very low heat, and then open the door a little bit to let the moisture escape, but not enough to let Cat jump in. And then after some time, it should look like this. Yeah. That's dry, which means if I just grind it up, it should have the consistency of grandma's ashes. Perfection. And with that, we're one step closer to the perfect spice.
That was great, man. In terms of an underrated strategy tip, if you will, I think not enough people make use of humor. And so you could argue that some of the biggest brands in the world over the past few years have grown by being able to leverage humor. An example recently would be DoorDash using 50 Cent and their beef ad. Another example would be Duolingo. Ironically, their head of social media or the people kind of behind the idea was the same person. Surreal is another brand that is killing it in sense of using humor. Basically what I'm trying to say is if you are a naturally funny person or have a dry sense of humor, it might be actually good for you to try and leverage that. So let's get into this first crazy shot. Everything from this shot all the way to here could be done one of 2 ways. First could be it's all generative AI. Everything has been extended, done as an infinite zoom. However, there's not that many odd AI things about it. This is probably done through 3 different points at which it's filmed. This is then the first shot at a certain vocal length, then the camera's pooped back. This is probably a second shot, and then this is probably the final shot. And then these are pretty much layered on top of one another, and then they're masked with a pretty strong feather in order to hide the cuts between the video, and then basically an infinite zoom is added onto it. A couple of people like Carl Shakur who've broken this down better than I can, mainly because I focus on editing, less on production, but it's a sick effect if you want to try.
White people.
White people using that as a hook is always a good way to get anyone's attention because instantly people are triggered. And so controversy is a natural trigger to use in your hooks.
They say we only like salt and pepper. Not me, though. In fact, I have too many spices, which is why I'm henceforth dedicated spices.
This is pretty easy to do once you know how, but in terms of text placement, place your texts on screen as such. Rotoscope out the 2 pigs in order to hide the text behind it. In terms of the design of the text, I think he's added something called RGB glow to it. That creates this like red, blue, yellow, or red, green, blue glitchy effect to it, if you will. Might also be that he's just added a red halation to it, and there's definitely a blur on there as well. So there's a couple of different layers that go into creating this particular look and feel if you want to recreate that. Might also be that he's just tripled text layers each time and changed the font color and then placed it slightly backwards so that it, looks kind of 3D, and then just added the blur on top. But there's also just a setting within Premiere whereby you can use RGB.
Which is why I'm henceforth dedicating myself to concoct the perfect spice. Episode 1, dehydration.
This particular effect is called motion tracking. select a specific point that you want to track, and the text matches along with it. You can do this in Runway, called motion tracking, ironically enough. You can also do it in After Effects, of course, using the tracker tool, but otherwise you can do it in Premiere, but it's quite time consuming because you need to manually position the keyframe, and so you also want to maintain the same distance between the words the entire time, because otherwise you won't be able to sell the effect, and that's quite hard to do.
Now, to get an ingredient to look like this.
How would you go about doing this? This is probably just 2 layers. Obviously the back layer is desaturated. You can automate the keyframes on saturation to lose color. And then this probably created an outline here in like an orange. Set a slight feather on the outline so that it looks like it's kind of fading, or a color matte, for example, and then just with an opacity mask. And then made it slightly transparent, so it's slightly see-through, and that's how it ends up becoming this kind of glow effect. And then obviously we have the top layer, which is just the original video with color to show the spices.
I'm gonna have to find a way to just yoink the moisture right out of it.
And then this is obviously the inverse of what I just said.
Right out of it.
Clever use of a visual to kind of sell the effect, but in essence it's again just 2 layers, only this time the smaller layer gets desaturated and the bigger layer doesn't.
I'm trying to dehydrate a tomato, which is not a woman, so telling it I drive a Cybertruck is not gonna do the trick. So I cut it into thin pieces, put it on a tray, toss it into the oven on a very low heat, and then open the door a little bit to let the moisture escape.
Small subtle detail here, open door. How would you place this? Have a text layer, click basic 3D, put it on your text layer, adjust the swivel and the tilt accordingly in order to make it feel as if it's embedded in the frame of your oven here.
Let the moisture escape, but not enough to let cat jump in. And then after some time, it should look like this. Yeah. That's dry, which means if I just grind it up, it should have the consistency of grandma's ashes. Perfection. And with that, we're one step closer to the perfect spice.
That was great, man. Other than that, the final thing I want to touch on, this video reminded me a lot of another one that I saw on YouTube called How to Make Everything, a Netflix documentary, and it's just a documentary about toast. Big recommendation for anybody to go watch that to understand how you can use storytelling to make people invested. And so the storytelling arc I had here made me interested to see what he's going to do to develop a new spice, which is, I think, a rare attribute that not a lot of people make use of enough. It's understanding how we can leverage storytelling in order to make us care about things which are otherwise boring. Cool, time to go on with the video 2.
Switch.
Very different video, but loved a lot of the details in this one in particular, so figured I'd try break it down. Other than obviously really creative shots when filming, there's a lot of that happened in post in order to sell this effect. First one being this. How would you go about creating this? Well, you take the desaturated video of the original thing that you shot. Maybe when you filmed it, you already shot it in black and white, but let's assume you didn't. You basically desaturate the video, and then you take the invert preset in Premiere and you chuck that on top, and what that's going to do is going to flip all of the colors. So everything that is black becomes white, everything that's blue becomes orange. You get it. And then you need some sort of glow line on top, maybe like a laser that kind of matches the frame of the body to sell this transition. It just makes it that little bit more unique than just inverting the colors. I think what's also smart is bringing back in the color after a few frames of black and white. And although it's as fast as possible, it gives you a certain feeling for what's going on. And so besides the obvious fact that these shots are just marvelous, this isn't hard. It's just 2 videos cropped onto 1 frame and leave with a little bit of space in between it so that it can breathe. These effects here as well, especially this one, these are called CRT frames. If you Google that, you can find a lot of frames that you can layer on top of things. For example, this one, which presents a recording, but there's different ones with like helicopter views. It basically makes it feel like you are recording in the moment, which somehow gives a unique feeling to the content that you produce. Again, more of the same effects, this time inverted here. Everything is inverted, which ultimately results in this like flash effect. But because this one's black and white, this one's blue, this one's orange, when they are inverted, they have their colors versus the beginning, which is just black. They're another use of one of these light flares, if you will.
Switch.
Also, wouldn't underestimate the use of sound effects for segments like this.
Switch.
The vroom there to perfectly match with the speed of the car. Engine flares to sell the speed, right? This detail, what it does, it makes you feel like the fire's coming out of the engine, and so it's adding to the visual of being fast, which is what you're kind of going for. And so although this is a tiny detail, your brain still notices it and therefore picks up on the fact that you're really fast. Very short video, but thought there were a lot of cool effects in there that add to selling this. Figured I'd share. And that has led us to Hooks of the Week. Hook 1. Film yourself going down an escalator. Hook 2.
We're throwing our very first emo night on 26th of December.
Film yourself sleeping and record yourself saying something and layer that on top.
I hate how people don't take artists seriously. If you tell someone you're busy making a song,
I like this one because it was simple in the sense of just having text on screen, and then making sure to be smart about what hook you use is a good way to stand out. So in this case, saying I hate something almost makes people always want to look more so that they can resonate. And that was Hooks of the Week. If you use any of those ideas in your next video, consider tagging me. And with that being said, it's time for the final video of today. We are flying through this. It's no secret that I've been fanboying this guy, so let me try and break down how I think he has made it. It's of course John, and as always, he's a master at creating sick cinematic content. So let me try and do my best to understand how.
We forget that the universe is built by small things, atom by atom, pixel by pixel. The work no one sees is the work that matters the most. Small enough to forget it's there, sharp enough to remember everything. Because greatness doesn't arrive, it accumulates, one frame at a time. The DJI Nano, the smallest camera to ever capture everything you'd miss. The way your hands move when you create, the mess on your desk that means you're building something. This exact moment before it becomes a memory, what will you capture?
What I love most is probably his use of fonts and typography. It's just so good. You can't even read it a lot of the time, but it's just somehow always works.
We forget that the universe is built by small things.
So starting this shot right away with orange color matte in this case, layer that on top, put the opacity to about 75 to 80 to start with, and then just decrease it really quick within probably, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 frames to 0. That's going to create this flash effect. Match that with a nice flash sound effect and Bob's your uncle.
Built by small things.
In terms of how this kind of masterpiece is put together, behind him he has an RGB light, an orange one. I've seen him do this a couple of times using Higgs field, whereby he just puts in prompts to like say what he wants to visualize. Let's say you don't do that. Let's say you're anti-AI and you want to recreate this shot. You can probably do this if you hide an RGB light behind yourself, in this case orange, and you shoot that at the wall using a cone to get that circle effect like this. Let's say you can't afford a cone, you could use a toilet roll. What you can also do, if that isn't an option, then you could even just film it orange and then film a different shot in which it's darker and then layer the shot on top of each other to kind of feather it. There's a few different ways as said, but that's going to create this, and the bleed will fill the room with orange. Then the text here is obviously hidden behind him. You rotoscope him out. If you don't know what rotoscope is, I covered it in the last video quite extensively. And then finally, it's clever text placement and also using blur to keep the focus on him, even though the text is there. Keep the focus dead center and ultimately create a bit of a 3D effect. So the closer things are to the screen, the more blurred they are. So that's why this is blurred heavier than this, than this, than this, and then this. Because only that way are you able to redraw the focus to where you want to look. It's a critical critical point that we should learn when it comes to designing, if you want to try and design things in 3D in order to understand how a camera works. To finally make my point, when the bottle is this close, it is blurred and I am still in focus. But when the bottle is like this, I am blurred and the bottle is in focus. And so understanding that will help you to replicate what that depth of field does for when you're trying to do the same using fonts.
Atom by atom, pixel.
Video here is probably a full screen video of like a DNA or things under a microscope, right? And then using an opacity mask and the ellipse tool, create a circle with a slight feather on it, so it's not too hard of a cut, and you can create this like ball effect.
Atom by atom.
And then the transition is invert the colors back to normal and invert the colors again and then zoom in and then back to normal. And that's a great way to visualize a glitch effect.
By atom, pixel by pixel.
I love the little layer effect on top here to really sell. Looks fucking sick.
So the work no one sees is the work that matters the most. Small enough to forget it's there.
Now, how would I go about creating this kind of curved text feeling as we see here? Premiere Pro doesn't have a native curving text tool as it does in, for example, Photoshop. What you can do is create the text layer as you want, add the effect corner pin on it, and just pin the points accordingly. This will warp the text effect layer to your liking so that it should match pretty closely with what you want to achieve here.
Sharp enough to remember everything. Because greatness doesn't arrive, it accumulates, one frame at a time. The DJI Nano, the smallest camera to ever capture everything you miss. The way your hands move when you create. Camera.
How would you create this?
Small.
Again, I think my boy has probably just cleverly used Higgs field, but either way, I still think you need a layer of the DJI filmed on some sort of blank background or at least green screen background so that you can have it in all its 3D glory, if you will, and then just change the backgrounds a bunch of times.
Smallest camera to ever capture everything you miss. The way your hands move when you create. The mess on your desk that means you're building something. This exact moment before it becomes a memory. What will you capture?
Again, replicating this flash using a camera. Similar to what I explained at the beginning, using the invert preset, and then just keyframing it to go back to normal through means of keyframes rather than just having it switch on and off. In this case, because of the flash noise, you will have wanted it to feel like how a camera takes a picture and therefore it fades rather than the glitch, which is kind of instant, hence the different approach to cutting it.
Moment before it becomes a memory. What will you capture?
Going about filming something like this, I'd probably have some sort of string attached to here. You can make such crazy things in AI these days that you might have just asked for a 3D model of the DJI. John, my boy, if you're watching this, let me know. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was another episode of Ryan Reacts. If you enjoyed yourself, do consider smashing the subscribe button. I'm trying to do this every week for at least this entire year and kind of see where I get to. So with that being said, I'll see ya in the next one.